the cause of the cancellation suspension of flights for UK citizens. Thousands of tourists therefore remain stranded in Sharm el-Sheikh, but some airlines have now announced they will resume flights from tomorrow in the hope of being able to bring back stranded holiday makers. Joining us now from central London is Raffaello Pantucci, the Director of International Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, anything we discuss right now is speculative. We're talking about intelligence that we know little about. But what do you think is the kind of intelligence that David Cameron has seen that led to him making this decision?
Well, I think it's, as you point out, it's a bit speculative for us to say exactly what it is. But clearly it's very specific intelligence that's quite specifically linked to a security gap or some sort of problem around the airport at Sharm el-Sheikh. I think it's very interesting to note that while the government has made this very specific expressed this very specific concern around an explosive device around this particular airport, they haven't raised the threat level across the entire country. They've continued to say that Egypt is a place that, you know, in some places is safe, in other places is dangerous, and they don't advise people to travel, but they're not saying that, you know, the whole country is suddenly becoming very dangerous. If you think back to the incident earlier this year at Sousse in Tunisia, the response to that was, you know, well, security around the entire country is of concern, and they raised the threat level everywhere. Here they've done it in a very narrow way to a very specific thing, which suggests that it's linked to something very specific emanating from the kind of airport area.
Our security correspondent Frank Gardner says it's unlikely they would share that intelligence with Russia, who are investigating the crash, because they don't share intelligence with Russia anymore. Relations are broken down. But why not Egypt?
Well, I mean, the thing is that we don't really know exactly what's being looked at, and we don't know exactly what the detail of the information is, and so we don't necessarily know how different people are assessing it. So it's very difficult to sort of judge exactly why it's being shared with one actor and not the other. I think certainly we've seen reports in the press that they have, you know, the National Security Advisor and his counterpart, his Russian counterpart, have spoken. Whether they've shared the intelligence and to what level of detail, it's very unclear. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the sensitivities around intelligence is obviously more around the provenance of the information than necessarily the information itself. So it's very difficult to know exactly what has actually been discussed and to what level of detail.
We don't know if it was a bomb, of course, but how plausible is it that it could have been a bomb? Security looks quite tight at Sharm el-Sheikh, but the BBC has been hearing from passengers today, surprised at some of the items they've been able to get onto planes.
Again, I mean, it's very difficult to know. I would suggest that, you know, given the importance of tourism to the Egyptian economy and given the tendency that the Egyptians have had to really focus their security on these sorts of locations, that they would probably have a pretty tight rein over kind of what was happening there. Whether individual tourists are able to get something past, well, I would argue, you know, are the sorts of people who are reporting these stories necessarily the people that the Egyptian authorities would be looking at with great attention? So, you know, it's possible that what we're getting is here a slightly skewed sort of interpretation of the security there. But traditionally, you know, Egypt has suffered substantially when they've had attacks on tourists because it really damages the local economy, and everyone realizes that, from the sort of terrorist groups to the authorities. So they do make particular effort around securing those locations.
It's quite interesting that the language we heard from the Egyptian president in Downing Street today. He revealed that there'd been security concerns among the British government some time ago, sending their own teams to check out the security at Sharm el-Sheikh. That does suggest there's been concerns for some time. Or is it routine?
Well, I think that, you know, generally what we've been seeing in Egypt is a threat picture that continues to be quite worrying. I mean, it's mostly, you know, reserved to sort of what's happening in sort of Sinai, northern Sinai in particular. But we have seen attacks in Cairo, we have seen attacks targeting government officials in some of the major capitals, and kidnappings of foreigners. So, you know, it's clearly a very dynamic threat picture and a dynamic situation, and it's one that would require sort of constant evaluation. So I think we could understand why British authorities would be looking at the situation there with concern at differing points in time. I think broadly speaking, there's a perception the Egyptians have got a pretty you know, firm grip on the security situation, but we do continue to see attacks able to get through in major cities. So that suggests they don't have total cover, which means that those observing it would maintain a sort of constant watching brief over what was going on and make sure that sometimes it required people actually going out there and investigating things for themselves.
Raffaello, many thanks for your time.